Welcome to the Bold SLP podcast. We are so happy that you're here and can't wait to share with you all of the amazing conversations we've been having.
We are the co-founders of the Bold SLP Collective, and we are also your hosts, Lisa, Desi, and myself, Ingrid. Each of us has a variety of experiences in all things bilingual and bimodal speech-language pathology. You'll get to know us pretty well on here.
We started this podcast to share our lived experiences, but also because we want to bring advocacy and cultural humility to the forefront of every speech therapy conversation. We hope that you'll join us each week, and we hope that you enjoy this episode. Welcome back to the Bold SLP podcast. This is Desi. I'm here with Ingrid and Lisa, and today we have an awesome guest. It's Dr. María Cioè-Peña. Dr. Cioè-Peña has graciously allowed us to call her Maria, so I just wanted to let you all know that before I have her come on up and introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maria. I am currently an assistant professor at the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Education in the Department of Educational Linguistics. That's the formal part. I am a former bilingual special education teacher in New York City. I am a mom. I have two small humans. I also have a dog who would probably feel really sad if she was left out. And yeah, I'm just really excited to be here and to learn together.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming. Just as a little backstory, we rescheduled maybe about 2 or 3 times. So we're really happy that we were able to make this happen. So one of the things that I had mentioned earlier is we read Dr. Cioè-Peña Maria's book. And I realized I don't have the title right in front of me.
I have it.
Oh, I know it.
And you know it. So
Yes. Mothering labeled children. And the M is my favorite thing because it's in parentheses, othering, when you take the M away, bilingualism and disability in the lives of Latinx mothers by Dr. María Cioè-Peña. And now you have the Spanish version on your website.
I know. That's what I was just thinking about. I was like, yeah, and the Spanish version is Criando Niños Etiquetados. I don't know what the second part of the meaning is, but that one's a little newer, so I haven't like.
Discapacidad y bilingüismo en la vida de madres latinas.
Gracias.
Yeah.
That's right.
And it's free up there for anybody who can read it in Spanish too, right?
Yeah, so, I mean, I guess I'll start there. This project is important to me. I think it was an opportunity for me to talk about the research, but also to talk about what I had experienced in a way that felt really humanizing and also true to my own practices as a teacher, as a parent, as a community member. But one of the difficult things with that is finding someone who's going to publish your work, right? I had publishers who didn't understand the work that I was trying to put out. And I found Multilingual Matters, which, I mean, they were so kind and just so understanding, and they really just supported me in that work. And I got to work with Dr. Nexi Hornberger as my direct editor. So someone else who also, right, had understood that there was more to talk about when we're thinking about language and school practices than just what happens in school. And for me, when I was writing the book, I really wanted 2 things. One, I wanted it to be plain language. I really wanted anybody who picked it up to be able to understand it. And if there were things that that I couldn't work around, then I really tried to break them down and make them really clear. But the other thing was I really needed those moms to read it. I really needed Patty, Anna, and Maria in particular, who end up being the testimonialistas in the book. I needed them to see themselves the way I saw them, and to see themselves the way their children saw them, to see themselves within a discourse that didn't make them the source of the failure or the source of the problem, right? But I couldn't do that until there was a translation. And I ended up getting really lucky because one of the first book reviews that was made about my book said something like, this would be really great if it was actually in Spanish and could help the people that it was meant to help. And so I was able to get it done. And because the translator ended up doing it pro bono, I was able to make it available for free, right? And so that was really important for me. And that my publisher still supported that, because usually they sell the language rights, but they understood that this was not something I'm making money off of, right? And so the women who contributed to this need to be able to read this.
That's
So
beautiful.
that's why the Spanish copy is free as opposed to the English copy.
Well, we have the copy in English and we had a great time. You were asking us earlier, how did this book land in front of you? And all credit goes to Alma. She's the AAC bilingual SLP in California. And she got it together and recommended it to us. I don't remember how it came about. And just like everything else, a group chat, we were throwing out ideas and she threw that idea out. And we all looked it up and we were like, yes, this is the book we want to do book club about. Because we had done one before that was very academic. And then for the next book club, your book was just a breath of fresh air for all of us.
Oh, thanks. I think one of the things that's important is, so I really do love writing. And it comes naturally to me, but I think the reason why it comes naturally and easily to me is because I like telling people's stories. And that's really important. And I learned through descriptive inquiry, right, a really affirming way of telling people's stories. That felt affirming to me, right? Where I was talking about what I see, not what I think, where I'm talking about what is happening, right? Rather than my judgment of what's happening or my evaluation of what's happening. And so I really like to think about how other people who I read, how they write about difficult things, right? So at the beginning of the book where we do the acknowledgements, I think like Toni Morrison, Kevin Boyle, and Kate DiCamillo, right? Because Toni Morrison, I think she can write about really beautiful things in a way that she can insert the voice of a character, right? And then pull back. So I really liked that. So this idea of how does narrative fit into my storytelling was important to me. Kevin Boyle has this amazing way of writing technical stuff. If you've never read The Arc of Justice, a saga, I think it's called like a saga, a tale of jazz and murder and a race and murder in the jazz age. The way he wrote this book, it reads like a Greek tragedy. And it's a nonfiction study, right? It's a study of a person and of a situation that happened, but talking about the different vantage points and spaces was like, I wanted to tell a story like that. I wanted to write a book that I wanted to keep reading, that I was just like, oh my God, I don't want to put this down. And then with Kate DiCamillo, I really love the way she respects her readers. She's a children's book writer, but she writes really about heavy, difficult topics in ways that doesn't fetishize children, and it doesn't, it really like helps them understand. And so that was what I wanted to do, right? Like these are hard things that people are living through, but this doesn't make them deficient people, right? It's just, let's understand these experiences so that we can all collectively be better. So I think those are some motivations, but the other thing too is just, I don't remember a lot of the big words. And so.
And sometimes you don't need them. Or you don't need them. I mean, I was actually thinking about your term, descriptive inquiry, and I was wondering if you could define it. The other thing that stands out about that term to me, it's really, for me, it feels like it's in stark contrast to the majority of the research that we have accessible to us as speech pathologists. So I'll let you give the definition, but I would really love to discuss why this plays such a big role for you and what it can do for us as therapists to really think about people's experiences versus something more empirical.
Yeah. So I was introduced to descriptive inquiry which is originally the work of Patricia Carini, in graduate school in my master's program. That was kind of like the anchoring program. And it was because the dean at the time, Cecilia Tra, was also a big proponent, and she still is a very large figure within the world of descriptive inquiry. So descriptive inquiry is originated from classroom observations in Vermont, where teachers were just trying to understand their students. And it was, instead of giving some formal assessment, let's watch them. Let's observe the students at different moments in time, and let's describe them, right? Let's describe their physical presence and gestures. Let's describe their modes of thinking and learning. Let's describe their means of connection, right? Their connections to others. There's 5 of them. And of course, right now, I can't remember all 5 of them, all 5 headings. But let's ground ourselves in what a child actually does when we're talking about assessments, not about expectations, right? But what is the child doing and how can we support that child? And then the inquiry then becomes, what's the question that the teacher has as to how to further support that student? And so for me, I've taken that angle, and you can use descriptive inquiry to study a child, which is the way that I just presented it. You can do it to study practice, and you can do it to study a school, right? And I've done all of those things. I've started originally by doing a lot of descriptive reviews of children. And one of the first ones that I did, shout out to the Institute for Descriptive Inquiry. One of the first ones that I did was about a student named Eduardo, who was a student in my bilingual special education class, right? I can't even remember what his classification was, but he really struggled with writing realistic fiction, right? But he had such an amazing creative mind, right? He had these little figurines, and there was like a little accident. One time the little figurine fell into one of those, remember those old school square soap dispensers?
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
Oh, with the refillable bag.
Yeah, and but it has a hole in the top. It wasn't a bag, it was like a hole. It's like at school, there was like a metal box.
Yeah.
And so one of his little figurines fell into it, and it became like a classroom crisis. And there was like a whole thing. And so I presented the story of this child in this crisis moment, right? Of like how he had this wonderful space of creativity and like had empathy for his little figurines, but could not craft a story. And when I first arrived to the group, because you present this in a community of people, right? And I think that's what I also love about descriptive inquiry, is that it allows the vulnerability of the teacher, right? To recognize, or of the participant, right? To recognize that I can't do everything, I can't know everything. So I'm going to come to my circle and I'm going to, get some ideas and workshop supports. So when I presented it, I was just like, what do I do about this kid? Because he's going to fail the ELA, right? The English Language Arts exam, because this is a 5th grader. And through this process, right, I was able to shift my practice and also my perception of this kid, right? So then I was able to, because of the recommendations of this group, tell him how he could take this story of what had happened to his figurine, right, which had really happened, right, and turn it into fiction by making the characters be alive. Right?
That's amazing.
What an amazing shift, right? And so what if we had that same kind of shift to other social problems and educational structural issues, right? And so for me, one of those issues is the ways we talk about parents, right? The ways I've talked about parents, the ways my parents have been talked about, right? And the ways parents are talked about around me, and the ways I've been talked about as a parent.
Yeah.
And how, I come from Dominican Republic, where it's a village is raising you, right? Mm-hmm. And other mothers come, also other immigrant Latina mothers are coming with this village is raising you perspective. And they also come with this sense of like, I don't have this expertise. I don't have, you're the experts and you're taking care of my kid and you're doing all these things and there's all these rules. And also I'm trying to build a life for myself in a new country. And now I have children and like, I'm a mother and I'm not in a new country learning a new language, it's difficult enough.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
We can all agree with that. I think it's really interesting to hear you talk about this, because we all have immigrant parents, all of us here, and we've all been through this experience of, oh, we're not the expert, we need to defer to somebody else. And it's really taken away power from our parents. I mean, I've witnessed it firsthand, I'm sure.
But is it though, right? Because I think that that's where descriptive inquiry really helps, that we look at it, because here's what happens, right? Teachers are looking at it, and instead of describing what's happening, we're making judgments. And so we say, that parent didn't talk at all, that parent doesn't care.
Yeah.
Right. But instead, that parent cares so much that they just don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to interrupt the process. They don't want to delay anything that's happening. So it's like they believe that their power is in their silence. Right. And I think that that's why descriptive inquiry is so powerful, because it allows us to see things from a different perspective and from a different angle. Right. Like when I was writing my dissertation, Ofelia Garcia, who is the most, I mean, she's everything to me. She is my other mom. And her and I like had a lot of tension because she wanted me to write more narrative around the quotes. And I was like, no, because this isn't about me, right? This is not about how I understand the situation. This is about how readers can look at it and see what is being said and what's being done, and really then make their own decisions about what they're understanding, right? And about how to enter. And I can, como se dice, like, I can craft the space around that, right? To be able to guide the conversation to a place where we're talking about this from a place of strength and not deficit. But it's still not my job to tell you what is happening, right? And I think that that's why I feel really, really empowered by descriptive inquiry, because I'm not telling you what mothers are experiencing. I'm showing you what mothers are experiencing, and they're telling you themselves.
Yeah. And it's just such a huge shift from the way our research is guided, right? You start with the question, you find the answer. And I felt like I was interrupting you, Lisa. You should go.
I'm just very inspired and moved from like the moment you open your mouth. It's just all gold, first of all. Secondly, earlier you were talking about academic language and how you prefer to just, speak at a level and write at a level where everyone can understand. I'm very much over academic language. I've been over it, and that's why I struggle to write. So I'm really happy that you're bringing this to the forefront. But thinking of academic language, it's a safe space for the scientists and the academics and the elites and the people on top. But the information doesn't get trickled down to the people that need to hear it, because it's just all hidden away in these big fat words. And to me, the funny thing is that what you're talking about now with descriptive inquiry, to me, it feels like a nice sciencey way of saying grace and love and respect, So it's a place where everyone can take it, the people on top and the people who don't have access to this kind of stuff. So go ahead.
I mean, for those people, we can just say, well, this work is rooted in phenomenology, right? And in constructivist theory and all those things, right? But like, just because I can say that doesn't mean that I necessarily am communicating what I care to communicate to other people. And I think that that's what you're really bringing here, Lisa, right? It's that, who do you want to talk to and for what reason? And I wanted to talk to teachers, and I wanted to talk to families. And I ended up speaking to service providers.
I was going to say, then you found a bunch of SLPs.
No, but it's the perfect thing. You found this area of study that targets everyone, all of us. Everyone needs to be heard and seen, and not be tested with a standardized measure that's very, very arbitrary and just helps the testers and not really the people that we're trying to service. But that figurine, I'm going to dream about that all night, let me tell you, because that is such a beautiful story, because you validated that child's feelings above all. You weren't just like, oh, that's a level 1 problem, or you know, something random like that. It was, you took it, you validated it, you turned it into a story that was very doable, and it was,
Yeah, and I think what you're saying reminds me also of another kind of purpose that I have in kind of doing this work, which is to highlight for people that special education, right, and special education students are not bad, and that there is the capacity for magic within special education. It's just we are not creating that. You know, I think I was really lucky. I was in a self-contained classroom for 4 years, which comes with its own complications. And I understand, you know, when white disability studies scholars talk about special education, they're focusing on the segregation, right? And they're focusing on the social segregation. But I think about the fact that like a bilingual special education place is inclusion for a lot of these kids, because a lot of these kids are otherwise denied access to those language spaces, right? Which means that then they are then denied access to those connections with their families. So I think that that's another reason why the showing, not telling is important, because it offers a space for all people who engage with these populations to find a place for themselves, right? To find an avenue for growth or shift or solidarity building.
So beautiful. I'm like, Lisa, I'm over here just taking it all in. I love that you said that you wanted the people who needed to read it to have access to reading it. I know that we talked about joining this book club as SLPs, but I think Lisa, Desi shared at the beginning that we ended up crying on some of our sessions because we were approaching it as mothers a lot of the time, seeing ourselves in a lot of the struggles. And so I think all the research needs to be like your research, where me as a scientist can get something from your book, like changing the way I use ELL in the trash, you know, learning new words for emergent bilinguals, and at the same time get the encouragement to not feel shame about my kids' bilingualism level. And in the same chapter, you reached my SLP brain and my mom brain, and my mom heart, you know, and I think I'm just so thankful that you're here, and I'm so glad we connected. I don't have much else to add right now. I'm like in my feelings.
I think I'm really grateful for having had good mentorship, and also people who were invested in me, and who encouraged me. You know, I think, so I had, when I was deciding which grad school to go to, this is a funny story that I rarely tell, so we may have to cut it later. But when I was deciding which grad school to go to, I called someone to give me advice, and they were like, you know, you should go to blah, 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 and you should work with Ophelia, because Ophelia is incredibly generous, and like, I've just never met a more generous person, and you are no wilting violet, and she can handle that, right? So this idea that I ended up later, see, this is a linguisticism, an idiom that's used in the US. I'm very bad at idioms.
We are too.
what was the term you used?
A wilting violet.
So
Is that like you're like no spring chicken? That
No,
kind of-
you're not easily intimidated.
Maria just did what
Oh.
I do. I mix them together. So it's shrinking violet or wilting flower. There's two
Oh yeah,
different
maybe it's that.
idioms
Maybe it's one of
I
the.
do that all the time.
Okay, so sorry. So what does the term mean?
So essentially, I don't know. The takeaway for me was that like, I'm gonna fight back, and I'm gonna push back.
It means that she's bold.
You're on the right podcast.
You sure are.
I had to do it. It was, I'm sorry.
It's so good. It's fine. But I think that helps, right? I think that was cultivated in me. I don't know how, like from when, or, you know, like I've always, and it's cost me socially at different moments, right? Like I know now I found out when I was 35 that I was autistic, right? And so I was able to understand more of the ways that I communicate with people, right? But I remember being in high school and asking a question that I thought was very appropriate. And all of my friends being like, wow, that's a terrible question. And then afterwards, having a conversation with my teacher, Cindy Phillips, who said to me, she's like, well, that was a good question. It's just that they didn't explain the context around what was happening. It was something about the famine in Africa. And Alec Weck and the women from En Vogue had come to our school to give an assembly, and they were like, children are starving, and they had like these paper things so you could see how small the wrists were and all these, and literally, and I now recognize that it wasn't the most sophisticated question, but I did raise my hand and I was like, so if these people are starving, why are they still having more children? And my peers were like, oh my God, how could you say that? And all these things, right? But like there was all this data behind it. There were rations that people were getting, that things weren't being explained to us, right? I ended up learning about power dynamics around sex and sexual abuse, right? That people also don't explain about, or about birth control and all these other things. So I think about, like, I've always had questions, and those questions have come from different angles and different perspectives. And I think that that's why I can look at something and be like, whoa, yeah, as a teacher, I see it this way, but as a mom and as a thing, and, like, I'm constantly, none of us is just in one role. So for me to present my writing or my findings as just one, as an academic, is disingenuous to me. And I don't want to spend my time doing that. I'm also not going to erase myself out of my research, right? Which I think is something that can very easily happen to us. This is scary research. There wasn't a lot of people who were doing it. There aren't a lot of people who are doing it this way. I started mostly submitting my work in bilingual education journals, and they were not happy with me. And I had to but I pushed back and I think that I was able to get to a place where I could put that book. Like, if I do nothing else professionally that is good, that book is more than anything that I could have wanted to do, for myself, for my family, for my participants, for my community. Like, it feels like something that I feel really proud of because it feels true to me. And I think that if I hadn't been supported in that boldness, it's very likely that I wouldn't have had the confidence to tell that story or to tell them in that way. But I will tell you, I mean, that process of data collection was very traumatic. It was very difficult. And I did have to go to therapy. And so I think if you are an SLP who is not seeking mental health supports, you should. I think if you're just in anything and you're not seeking mental health support, you should, because particularly when we're working with these families, that's heavy. And, I couldn't reflect back or like do anything. Like, you just take it in and you carry it because I'm just listening to it. But I couldn't cry at meetings, right? Like, I had to hear these things in real time and see women. And if you've done that, if you sat there, sorry, I'm gonna cry.
Don't make us cry.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
I think that if you've sat in a space where someone has given over so much of themselves to you for no reason, like they were getting a couple of books in Spanish and maybe I would answer some questions, like, you have a responsibility to share that. And you have a responsibility to share that in a way that is supportive of your participants and of your people. And I feel similarly, like if I was a classroom teacher, if I'm writing an IEP, I have a responsibility to these families. I have a responsibility to more than just my job. And I know that that's hard, but I hope that one of the things I can come through from the book is for people to have data, right? To be able to say, this is the thing. and this is my support, and this is my resource, and this is my backup plan, because we have to do things differently if we're going to really take care of families and really do work that's in the end for the greater good. Oh, that sounds
I
so
think we need to
sermon-y.
make all the monolingual SLPs listen to those 5 minutes when they ask us, like, why do you feel like you're more burnt out? Why do you feel like, this is more taxing on you than me? And it's like, this is my mom sitting in this room surrounded by 10 strangers waiting for the interpreter. Every time I walk into that room, I see my mom. It's not the same for me than for you.
And that that it's still happening to so many other women. And how is it still happening? And I don't want to discount the fathers, because I think it's also happening for fathers, but it's very, very accepted to do to mothers.
It is. And grandpas and grandmas and aunties and all the parents who come here just hoping to find someone who speaks their language and do the best that they can for their kids.
Yeah. And I want to say, I mentioned this in the book, but I'll say it here. Like, when I'm talking about mothering, I'm not talking about it in a gendered capacity. Like, I'm really talking about people who are mothering. That was a big thing, because I wrote a couple of articles where someone's like, why are you using Latinx if these are all mothers? And I was like, well, I never asked them all their gender. I just asked if they were mothers, right? Like, the inclusion criteria was mothers, not female or cisgender or like any of those things. So thank you for saying that, because I think when people hear me talking about mothers, they think I'm only talking about women or cisgender women, but I'm really talking about the person who is doing the mothering, right? That effort, that labor.
Right.
I'm looking at you, Desi, so I'm assuming.
I'm just sorry. I'm still processing. I think that this is such a powerful conversation. It's one thing to read your book. It's another thing to have this conversation and have you say these things. I think we have all talked about the conversation about labels. All of us here were also labeled as English language learners when we got to school. And I know that that's something that, at least for me and Ingrid, we've talked about, like, that label being placed on our own children. And Lisa it's more complex, I feel, because they live in Canada and there are different power dynamics around languages there. But I mean, it's this really interesting place to land, right? Like, even for me, that I live in a state that's predominantly white and monolingual, I'm always disturbed by the dynamics, and the assumptions that are made about people, and, even just by parents themselves. They enter some sort of like clinical space or, school-based space, and they, I've even heard things such as, oh no, you can do the evaluation in English, almost because this, their goal is for the child to speak English and not necessarily their home language. It's just really intense to watch the eradication of language and how that impacts culture. And then ultimately, like you mentioned in your book, mothers, parents, the people involved in raising, criando, right? Like, I even feel like criando is a better word for it. These people, making them whole, or what does wholeness look like at home, but then you send someone, to school, and it almost feels like a bit fragmented, which is some of the burden I feel as a mother to a child who is a Spanish dominant child. So I don't know, it's not so much a question, but it's really powerful to think that we still rely on an educational system that is just ironing out all of our differences and making us all the same. I really love the fact that your book pushes back on that, right? Everyone's different. Everyone has intersectionalities that make them who they are. So I again, this is a conversation that I really hope people who just don't have this experience or don't have this life experience, don't carry any sort of intersectional, or they don't feel like they carry any intersectional identities, can really like process and, just hear your perspective.
And I think one thing that's where my work is now, right, is shifting away from talking about these intersectional experiences or identities, right, and thinking about the need for intersectional systems. Because, it's still going to fall on the individual SLP or the individual teacher who reads the book or who does the thing, as opposed to what are the policy, standards of this. And I think what's important to think about is, I know why we use these labels. I know why we use these categorizations. Like, I totally understand it, right? It's orderly, it's easier to keep track of. We like do all these things. But is order more important than humanity and development, right? And when I mean development, I mean individual growth, like communal growth, being able to fit in these places. Because what ends up happening, right, Desi, as you mentioned, these mothers make these decisions. You can evaluate them in English. And sometimes it's because they want their kids to get the English, but sometimes it's because they want to get this negative process done as quickly as possible. Because they're like, great, that's not what's supposed to be happening. This is new, right? My kid has labels and different classes and all these things. I just want to be done with this, right? Like, I think a lot about Nancy, who's one of the moms in the book, who says, yeah, after we're done with the IEP, we can think about language, because they understand it as something temporal, right? But we as educators, right, and as service providers know that it's not. And so if we know that it's not something temporal, then we have to either work to make it temporal or work to eliminate it. Because it's not fair for kids to just be put into these tracks. This is tracking. This is tracking. This is tracking, but in any other name, right? This is tracking under the guise of support, which I say that all the time in my work, right? We say we're helping these kids, but how are we helping them if they cannot communicate with their families, with their communities? How are we helping them if the definition of independence is disconnect from everything that they culturally are bound to, right? That cannot be helpful.
Yeah, Ingrid and I just recently had a conversation about this. There are almost like you're almost penalized, in so many ways. And it's really disturbing. I know that, even among bilingual SLPs, we still have these perceptions of, oh, they just need that additional support. We'll get them in, we'll give them an IEP. But it's that additional label that's going to follow them around forever.
Why do so many white students have 504s compared to students of color?
Yeah.
So yeah, we can do it. We could absolutely, I hear you, but why are we not using the same processes? Why are we not funding school, right? Like, why are we not making sure that we're having enough SLPs in these school communities? So like, I don't know, I am going to get myself in trouble, but it's just like, you choose.
Never.
There was this wonderful woman who gave a talk where she said, we pick the data to support our argument. Right?
Isn't that the truth?
And so that's what we're doing. When we're basing our decisions on anecdotal data or on the data or based on like what our school has available or what our school can do, then we're picking our data to fit our argument. Yeah. Right? We're not really doing things to support the student, which is what it's supposed to be, right? We talk so much about the individual education plan, right? Catherine Volgerit's book talks about compliance, right? How everything now is just about compliance rather than thinking about what is the purpose of IDEA in supporting learners? What is the purpose of the Bilingual Education Act, right? Like, what were those purposes? Instead, it's just been taken into how can we tag these kids and assess them and put them into these different little avenues. Which is really disappointing. So sure, you want to do it as support, I'm here for it. Why can't we do it as an academic intervention service? Why can't we do it as, you know, a 504 or something else that isn't committing this child to this very stigmatized space? Yeah.
Can you talk about 504s just for the, maybe if we have Canadian listeners?
Sorry. Yes. So a 504 is essentially just a temporary IEP. It's like short term. More often it's used for students who have like injuries or something. So if an athlete breaks a leg and then they have to get services at home, right? Then you get a 504. If they need to be able to use an elevator for a temporary amount of time, then you get a 504. So if we're thinking about a speech impediment or a, you know, some linguistically based impediment happening, well, and we think it could evolve, then why wouldn't we start there? Why don't we start at a more temporary place, right? We don't do as much early intervention, right? Because, and then what ends up happening is a lot of these families, if they do get some, it's towards the very end, right? By 2.5, 3 years old, and then it gets rolled over into an IEP. And I do want to say that I am grateful that this has been picked up by SLPs, because I do think speech is one of the most common entryways for special education for a lot of these families. And they don't necessarily understand why. And I think that I mentioned offline that where my work is moving is towards this crip linguistics, which is a theory that was developed by John Henner and Octavia Robinson around expanding what language is, right? Because language really should be about meaning making, and it isn't, right? And so when we get a child at the beginning who isn't communicating orally, why aren't we teaching those families sign? Like, why not? Why aren't we teaching them a shared means of communication? Instead, we're like, okay, we're going to put your kid in English right away because we want to get them into services right away. We don't want to delay and wait for, you know. So a 504 is a temporary plan, and I never know how to answer just one question.
I love it. We want all the answers. We want all the answers to all the questions. I don't know if this is like related to what you're talking about, but for me in the private sector, but more often in the public sector, speech therapy was used as a way to break the news to the parents that it's probably something larger, like autism, or because it was just, they would say, and I quote, "It's an easier pill to swallow when it's just language and not the full global development issues." And so I wondered if you maybe had that experience.
Yeah, and I've had that experience as a teacher, and that is a very painful experience to have as a teacher. I'm like, I have a child in my mind, right? Like in a conversation that I had with a mom where she came to me, and this was a 3rd grader, and she's like, "Why is he still in this class?" I was like, "Oh, he's in this class because he receives special education services." And she's like, "Yes, but I was told it was about speech. He talks fine now. So why is he still in a special education class?" Right?
Yikes.
So again, right? It's disinformation. It's disrespectful to families, and like, I don't care if it's an easier pill to swallow. Like, we don't tell people they have a tiny bit of cancer. You have cancer. Like, you need a support. And like, again, and I don't want to equate a disability with cancer, right? Because I don't think that it's that. And but if you are thinking of it as a negative thing, then just tell people these are adults and these are their children. How dare you have more information than a parent about their child? Like, that's enraging to me. How dare you? How dare you believe that you have a right to have a greater awareness of what this child needs now, tomorrow, and into the future than this parent?
It's dishonest and it's cowardly.
Sorry, I just got very angry.
No, I get very angry too, because it's just like cowardly behavior. Like I never stood for it. And I would tell parents straight up, this is what we think. We're saying it's language, but I'm telling you it's not, or not that it's not, but it's more than language at this
Or
point.
right now it's manifesting as language, and later it could be something different. We don't know. But again, this is why I really want to break out of these shells of like these labels and categories. You know, like if I had been diagnosed as an autistic child, I'm not sure I would have the life that I have. And that's not a good thing to say. And I don't mean that, you know, in a like, I would have been denied access to a lot of spaces, and I recognize that. And so why do we continue to do that?
There were a lot of neurodiverse affirming spaces when I was growing up. Maybe they existed, but I didn't know of them, and my parents certainly didn't know of them. So I think the way we talk about autism and different types of neurodiversity is coming from a lot more, coming from a more positive place. It's just a rewiring. They think differently. Even your question earlier about Africa, like I am certain many children had the same question in that moment. And so it's, yeah, just to go back to that, I'm really happy that you were able to maintain your boldness, because I think for it was like extinguished out of all of us at a very young age. And either we were silenced or felt silent, felt silenced, sorry. And so many times I would stop myself from saying something, and then someone else would say it and everybody would applaud them. I'm like, oh, I was thinking it, but I was sure that it was dumb because I was thinking it.
It's one of the reasons why I really encourage students to ask all the questions, because I think that that's why that's what sustained the boldness, is that I still had questions, and I was not satisfied. I would not be satisfied, and I'm still not satisfied unless I'm exploring the questions that I'm interested in. Or I don't know, I've wanted to stay in school for like my whole life, so I guess for me that's also like a little bit of a different kind of space, that like I'm also allowed to maintain my boldness because I work alone a lot, right? Or and I work with communities that appreciate the work, and I don't mean that in terms of institutions. I mean that in terms of people and groups of people. And I mean, this is great, right? But like, I love when I get to go back to my neighborhood in Sunset Park and I see moms and they say things to me like, oh, you know, we're changing this thing, or that, you know, my friends who are still teaching at that school that I taught at in Sunset Park read the book too, and they're making different changes to classroom practices and things at the school. So it's boldness in service, and it's hard for me to give up.
Yeah. And I mean, what an honor to be able to do that for your own community. That is so powerful.
It is. That can be your last word.
We could be here forever. Like, I really could chat with you guys.
Yes.
This is so great.
I was going to tell you, I saw the first IEP coming in from Colorado that did not say ELL on the IEP paperwork. It said EC, Emerging Communicator. And I was like, yes, when are we getting there? You know, because I still have to check that ELL box every time I have an IEP.
Yeah.
It's changing.
It's definitely changing.
Mm-hmm.
It's changing, and there's hope, and we can change it, you know, by communicating, by talking to each other. And I'm not interested in making anybody look bad or, you know, feel guilty. I'm just interested in, this is what it is, and we can be better. And how do we do that? And I'm also constantly recognizing my own failures within that system and constantly reflecting on how I too can be better. So if you think of a thing, shoot me an email.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been such an amazing conversation. And I thank you for sharing so much of, you know, your personal stories as well. Ingrid did make mention of the fact that we usually have what we call the final word. So we try to kind of come up with a word that really summarizes the episode for us. I don't know if you had a word in mind already, Ingrid.
I have a lot of words in mind, but I think mine that I'm taking away from this conversation, Maria, is inspiration. Because I used to be like you. I used to love school. I used to be bold, make all those questions. And like Lisa said, along the way, I didn't find that person that encouraged my boldness. I'm finding it now again, decades into my profession. But I left grad school and I was like, I never want to step foot in one of these places ever again. And now meeting you, and then last spring meeting Dr. Scott, she does work in Minnesota as an SLP. I'm like, there are people in these institutions that would encourage me and welcome me. So like for the first time, I'm thinking like I can go back there and be okay. So
Yeah.
Inspiration.
Thanks. Oh wait, I'm not supposed to talk.
No, you're free.
You
to-
have the last word too.
Stop. We're not trying to squash anybody's boldness here, please.
Oh my God, please, you can make your own path.
Is that your last word, or is that just a statement for Ingrid?
That's just more inspiration for me.
That's just my message to Ingrid.
Thank you.
Ingrid, when you want to go to grad school, call me. We'll figure it out.
I wanted to add too that this conversation just makes me think about how you're right. Sometimes I think I tend to think about a lot of some of the negative things. I'm not going to lie. I tend to be more realistic, in terms of like obstacles, but I do think that this conversation has given me a lot to be positive about. And the fact that, even hearing about your struggles to find a publisher, I mean, I just think about, wow, like that's it. I'm so grateful that you worked so hard to publish this book. And I think that, anytime I'm connecting with people, I especially on bilingualism, especially in helping people understand emergent bilinguals, your book doesn't go without mention. So I just wanted to say that I am grateful. I'm grateful that we are having these conversations. I'm grateful that you've made this space in academia. I'm sure there were plenty of times when it was not the most comfortable space. And so I'm grateful that we're moving together in this direction.
I have like a little bit of a couple of words, I guess, but ask your questions is my big takeaway. Just keep on asking them. To you, Ingrid, I have to say, though you felt silent way before I met you, obviously, you have empowered so many SLPs to speak up, and like you're the reason like we all met, so whoever silenced you or tried to, they did not succeed. So let's just say that. And I really do, I want to believe you so badly, Maria. And I also wish to go back to school, but just academics, they just scare me. And just the sheer level of ableism that is perpetuated in institutions it just doesn't feel like a safe space for me. So I'm trusting you that you are forging a new path for people like you, which I want to be like. So I'm hoping for that, but ask your questions this one.
I'm really grateful.
Well, thank you so much. We are grateful all overall, and I really hope we can stay in touch. And how can people get in touch with you if they're interested in learning more about the work that you're doing or following up with you?
Yes. So I have a website, mariacioe-peña.com, and please share it with your friends, because it is where I put all of my articles so that you don't have to go behind a paywall. So anything that I publish, I link there in the title. I always attach a PDF. I'm on Instagram, Cioè-Peña_PhD. And I'm on Twitter, but I'm so bad at Twitter. I think the easiest way is just, social media. I think Instagram's a pretty good way of getting in touch with me and seeing what I put out there. I'm not one of these like public scholars who's like sharing their thoughts all the time every day. So which is why I appreciate this space and conversation. But I do share what I'm working on and what things are moving forward there.
Awesome. Well, muchas gracias. Woo. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so
and
much.
We'll be back in touch. Thank you.
Hi, before we let you go, we wanted to share with you something that we've been working on behind the scenes. It's a really exciting collaboration with SLP Nerdcast. We are creating a 4-week grad credit course with them to be released for the summer of 2023. All of us three together are working on this course that means so much to us. It'll be solutions and strategies to prevent harm in bilingual and multicultural evaluations. It's going to be so great, and we are so thrilled to be working on it. We can't share it with you yet, but it's ready for pre-order. So if you want to check it out, go to our bio on Instagram or to our website. Thank you for listening and supporting the Bold SLP Collective. You can find a closed caption version of this podcast on our YouTube channel. We will also have show notes on our website. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you do all the podcast things. Follow, subscribe, download, and review. And don't forget, we love hearing from you, so connect with us on Instagram at the Bold SLP Collective. Stay bold and humble. See you next time.